This is the Rush Discuss, where the discuss is Rush. Net boy and net girl coming at you for today's episode of the Rush Discuss.
I told you to do that as a joke.
You tell me and I do it anyway. No, but today we'll be discussing time and motion versus virtuality. And if you've listened to these songs and you know what we're referring to with that bit of goofiness. If you
haven't listened to those songs, you are very confused right now.
No. This is our second to last pairing for this least popular bracket. And I'm sure there are some of you who are like, finally, we're almost done. We can stop talking about these songs that we hate.
Except we love them all, so.
Although I will say that today, with one of these songs, this is actually still, I would put it farther down on my list.
Same, but I don't think they're the same song, you and me, I mean. I don't know, we'll see. Just so you know, Adam never tells me beforehand what his initial choice is. He always keeps it a secret. And so I don't ever know.
Just like to keep things for the podcast for you guys.
Yeah. Yeah, like when we first started doing this podcast, we'd start talking about the songs. He'd be like, no, wait, save it for the podcast. I'll be like, okay.
I just didn't want to spoil everything.
It's true. It's understandable.
Because I feel like if we talked about it beforehand, then we wouldn't have as natural reaction, give and take.
Yeah, absolutely fair.
So today, both these songs come from Test for Echo, which is yet another album, much like Hold Your Fire, that ends up on the bottom of a lot of people's rankings for Rush albums. And this one, I think, is a little bit more understandable to me than Hold Your Fire, because 90s Rush, as we've talked about with Presto and Roll the Bones, which I know that Roll the Bones is the only 90s album that I just said there, but we've talked about how Presto seems like a 90s album. Mm-hmm. I feel like out of the 90s albums, the only one that really nailed it completely was Counterparts. And then Test for Echo, I think one of the things that kind of sends it to the bottom of people's lists is that there's almost more long form songwriting going on as far as what they're doing with their musical ideas. They take a long time to develop what they're doing musically. There's a lot of repetition to get you to the point sometimes. And it's a very dense album, a lot more sounds being experimented with, and kind of like what we talked about with Dog Years. If you aren't listening on optimal speakers or headphones, it can be easy to miss all this stuff that's going on.
Yeah, it can be really muddy sounding, these songs, especially because they're heavier. And so it can kind of just turn people off of like, I mean, I feel like especially with the beginning of one of these songs, that's very heavy. I can feel, I can see that. I can see how people would be like, okay, skip.
But I think what also does it is that it's not just that it's heavy and that it's just overbearing sometimes, because there are plenty of bands that do approach music that way and nobody has an issue. I think it's because it's Rush, and so people expect a certain thing from Rush, even though the only thing that you should expect is that they're going to change. And then also, this album, a lot of the lyrics, they almost have like a folk song attitude in them. And then you also have things like Resist, where it is like a folk song, but you have these heavy guitars. Mm-hmm. And so it's like this weird kind of pairing of folk metal.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I definitely don't want to knock this album because it is really unique and it's really great. But it certainly is one that I don't listen to as often. It definitely is in the mix. And I won't skip songs from Test for Echo if I'm shuffling all of Rush. But it's very rare that I'm going to be like, okay, I'm going to listen to Test for Echo from beginning to end. I don't think I've ever done that, really.
Yeah, I actually did that today because it was trying to help me figure out between these two songs, because it was a really tough decision for me to pick one of these songs. And so part of kind of my process for this pairing was to listen to the whole album and see kind of how, with the album ordering, where they fall in that album order and kind of how they support the album, and compare things that way as well. Which I haven't listened to that whole album start to finish for a while. And so listening to it again, it was interesting to see how I still really enjoy it, but it is one that you have to be in the mood for. You have to get into it. And that's why I felt like I needed to listen to it start to finish to be able to make a decision on these two songs, because just listening to these two songs out of context made it really difficult for me, just because it's almost like this album, you have to be coaxed into it. And I feel like the title track, which is the first track, Test for Echo, just it sets the stage, lets you know you're going to have a little bit more patience with with the music in this, and then you're brought into it little by little, and then by the time you're a couple songs in, you're like, okay, I kind of get it, and now I'm in the mood for the rest of the album.
With that great intro on Test for Echo, let's go ahead and start with Time and Motion, that intro.
So as you can see there, the intro is quite a bit longer than what we're used to.
Yeah, that was one of my first comment. And I've listened to Time and Motion many times, but today when I listened to it again to prepare for this episode, I had forgotten just how long it was, and I was like ready to start singing with Getty, and then I like kept jumping the gun because like, oh yeah, it's still going. I forgot.
Yeah, and this is a song that I think gets on the bottom of people's lists quite a bit, because it is almost like it's trudging through.
Yeah, those half steps are very intentional and not always what people want to listen to. Dissonance isn't always everyone's favorite, but I think that, it's serving a purpose, but it's definitely a different kind of mood you have to be in to want to listen to something like that.
Yeah, and just musically, there's a lot of modulating that goes on, and it kind of extends what's happening. So it's like in a normal song, you'll have a brief intro, you'll get to the point with the verse, and the verse itself will, it'll stay at one place, and then it'll go to a different place for the chorus, go back to the same place for the verse. But for these verses, it's almost like it just never ends. It just keeps modulating, going to a different place, and so your brain registers it as if it's changing keys, but it's not changing keys. It's just very abruptly going to another place, and it makes you feel like you're in a new place, but then all it's really doing is just extending the verse.
It's really unsettling, honestly, because you're like waiting for that moment of respite, and you're like, where is it? When is it going to come? And then it kind of comes with some of the guitar fills, but it is an interesting thing that you're just kind of rolled along in this song. I don't know, it reminds me of like being on the ocean.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good text painting.
Yeah.
And because the lyrics themselves are very much, I mean, it's called Time and Motion.
Yeah.
And just kind of the correlation between those two words, and just how life just feels like it's just inevitably moving forward. And the first thought of the song, time and motion, wind and sun and rain, days connect like boxcars in a train, fill them up with precious cargo, squeeze in all that you can find, spontaneous elation and the long enduring kind. It's a very prevalent theme with Neil of examining the process of just living life and feeling like you have to try to hold on to the train of life that's just going, that you just trying to hold on to the memories as they happen, just try to insert yourself with some amount of control over the relentless pounding of time.
Yeah, that's definitely what this song feels like. And I do have to be in a particular mood to listen to this song, as we were mentioning earlier. And so going in, I didn't know how I felt about this song in context of the pairings. But listening to the intro again now, it really is continuing to grow my appreciation for it and make me really wonder what I'm going to choose this time.
I think for me, listening to it on these headphones, it really makes all the difference. Because when I was listening to the songs today, it was just while I was working, very repetitive labor, painting someone's house. And I just have one of my earbuds in, just listening to them on repeat. And so when you only get half of the picture, because even though it's playing in mono, so I was getting still getting all the instruments, still getting the mix, but I wasn't getting the full stereo effect. I wasn't getting the richness that comes from the headphones. And so there's a lot that's missing, just like we talked about with dog ears. Having the right kind of headphones, the right kind of speakers makes all the difference with this album.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Because I don't know, I was listening to them earlier. I was just doing it on my phone, just on my speaker with my kids around. And so it was obviously not ideal, but it definitely was not much nicer listening to them now with these headphones. But do you have any other thoughts for Time and Motion, or shall we move on to Virtuality?
Just one more about the intro with the synth.
Yeah.
It's a very strange choice, I think.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was actually going to bring it up and forgot. That synth part is so interesting. It's so different from what is going on in the rest of the song.
I mean, it is sonically very different, but I think it does go along with just the relentless nature of the song.
Yeah. That was what I meant by it as well. And it works, and yet it sounds almost out of place.
Yeah, it's a very dated synth sound, because for the time it was just fine. It was it was what was being done, but now there are much better sounds. And I think maybe if it was an actual string section, then I think it would do well to be revisited with an actual string section. And I think having actual players would add the nuance that I think that line needs, because it is so relentless, and they do have accents in there that pop out, but because it's not as nuanced as an actual string player would be, I think it loses some of the strength that line could have.
Yeah, it's very metronomic in that sense, and yet, like we said, it works.
Yeah, and just the last thing on that. It's not even a riff. It's just like a sequence almost. I don't even know how to phrase it, because it's just a long rambling line. And I think a part of what makes it a little awkward is because we're in a non-conventional time signature. And so it kind of underscores that, and it doesn't make it flow as nicely as some of the other times when they're playing in an unconventional time signature.
All very good things to think about with Time and Motion. And now we're going to move on to the intro of Virtuality.
Like a shipwrecked mariner, adrift on an unknown sea, clinging to the wreckage of a lost ship fantasy.
eat your heart out with that riff. I love that riff so much.
This song just has so much going on in a good way. I love was it cowbells that he's hitting on? Like he's got the tick, 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 tick.
I don't remember. I didn't know there was cowbells.
I mean, that's what I think it is. It's a percussive moment after the first line.
Oh, I think it is. Yeah, I know what you're talking about now.
Yeah. And I just love that Neil brings back the cowbell, the melodic cowbell.
I love the cowbell. This song, I remember when I first listened, when we were listening through this album for the first time, when we got to Virtuality, Adam was like, yeah, a lot of people don't like this song because it's super dated, like lyrics wise, and they just think it's kind of weird. And I was just like, but it's awesome. I don't know, like it is a little goofy and kind of in the realm of what are they singing about? But at the same time, I love this song. Every time it comes on, I'm like, yeah, net boy, net girl. I think it's great. But also the riff in particular, that heavy chromatic riff is kind of like my favorite kind of thing to listen to, and would have been very much in line with the music I would have been interested in my formative years. And so I think that kind of speaks to me, and like I've said like too many times. And so it speaks to me and is something that makes my inner teenager, I guess, happy. If that makes any sense.
Well, especially since this is like your life as a teenager.
Oh, really?
You were definitely
yes.
a net girl.
Yeah, I was definitely in the online world all of my teen years, all the online friends. Back in the day, that was when you were on AOL Messenger, and forums. Like this is back before Facebook, and we had MySpace, but all of my friends were on forums, so I don't know if any of you guys identify with that. But so yeah, Adam's very right that this is kind of a glimpse into my past life. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the people who say it's dated is because this is very much this early internet days that he's referring to. But I think it's kind of cool thinking about, it's almost like when you're doing Crusoe economics or anything like that, where you pare everything back to its basics. You're on a desert island, only two people. Let's build it up from there. And it's almost like he's approaching the internet in that way, that the internet at that time was a way to bring you out of your island.
I love the double meaning of, well, not the double meaning, just the play on words of it being like they're on a ship, and I don't know, just that imagery, but then also the internet. I don't know. I think that's so funny.
And just the imagery of that you're able to connect to people that you could never connect to, just as if you were shipwrecked on an island. How would you get your message out there? I mean, thinking of the progression of the internet to where it's now such an integral part of most people's lives. I mean, this is how most people get their news, how they associate with people. Friendships online sometimes are more meaningful than friendships in person to some people. And so even though the wording may be a little bit dated and some of the sentiment and excitement about the internet can be a little bit dated, I think it's still extremely accurate, especially the part in the bridge. Let's dance tonight to a virtual song. Press this key and you can play along. Let's fly tonight on our virtual wings. Press this key to see amazing things. Like I said, the lyrics seem a little dated, but that sentiment is still very much alive in the internet. How much escapism is there on the internet. And, you know, all these social media apps that we don't necessarily think of it as the internet.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's what it is. You're connecting to these people that you would never have connected with otherwise.
That's something this is not really related to the song, but just related to the internet. Well, I guess it is because it's related to the internet. But I was just thinking the other day how it's like you never really get a break from the internet these days because it's always in your hand. Whereas before you had a desktop computer, and if you had to go somewhere, you'd say BRB and actually have to like not be in that world at that time. And so it's wild to think that this virtual world is just a part of our lives constantly now, and how different it was whenever Neil wrote this song.
Yeah, and to bring it back to that idea of Crusoe economics, or just Crusoe anything, where if you don't know what that is, it's just the idea of taking any philosophy, economics, anything that you want to examine, bring it back to its most basic. What if you were on a desert island? How would these things interact? And then just kind of logically, step by step, bring you to further conclusions and make observations about the world and about whatever social science. And so I think in thinking of it in that context, with this song, I think it's kind of cool to think about how this song is almost like the starting point with Crusoe internet, so to speak. And we're living in a time now where we've built line upon line until now what started as a shipwreck on a desert island, reaching out to try to find other people, is now a huge infrastructure with full-on highways going in between different islands. And now we don't even think of it as an island anymore because there's just so much traffic going around, and this is now a thriving metropolis.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And to go back to the music side of things, I love the chorus. I love singing along to it. I love the echo bit of put your message in a modem. I think it's super entertaining, and I always enjoy listening to this song.
The only thing that I've always wished this from the first time I heard this song, at the let your fingers walk and talk and set you free. I always wished that there was like an echo of and set you free, free, or something like that.
I've definitely never thought of that or wished that.
But that's just my goofy self.
Yes.
But I think this song is the perfect balance between that heavy guitar, heavy metal rock sound with the folksy stuff mixed in there. Like the music just goes seamlessly between those two things and gives you a really cool effect in total. Whereas I think Time and Motion doesn't quite get there, because I feel like the lyrics, when you just look at the lyrics, and I hadn't done this before.
You're talking about the lyrics of
Time and Motion, yeah.
Okay.
Just reading through the lyrics, removing it from the context of the music, I imagine a completely different musical idea with
actually,
it.
I'm the same. And like we were saying, it does have good text painting. It does work for what it is, but at the same time, it isn't. I mean, not that I'm the one that can write a song, but it isn't exactly what I would have imagined. But at the same time, it does work. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it works from the perspective they were coming from, but I think there were other perspectives that could have been examined with it, because then you get some kind of awkward vocal moments, like the spontaneous elation and the long enduring kind, which that it's not the strongest line that Neil's ever written, because he's just saying, in essence, spontaneous stuff and also the longer stuff. And it's
I love the way Getty sings that line, actually, but I see that what you're saying about it.
Yeah, it just kind of makes. I think this is one of those songs where Getty had to kind of figure out how to sing the lyrics.
I think it's a strange melody too. It's not really interesting as far as just the melody. If you just isolated what the melody's doing, it's kind of uninteresting, honestly.
It's almost more like a polyphonic piece.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Where you have the guitar doing its thing, the bass doing its thing, the drums doing its thing, and the vocals aren't as much meshing with everything else as just being another instrument that's just kind of in the mix. And when we talk about polyphonic music, this refers back to the Baroque era with early music. Bach was a really good example of this. If you look at any of his fugues or a lot of his keyboard works, they aren't as much chord based, and it's much more just different melody lines where there's not really a dominant melody line as much as just multiple melody lines that kind of take their turns of being what you're focusing on. And I feel like it's not that they necessarily set out to do that with this song, but I feel like it's a little closer to that idea of music, which is a little bit more difficult to get into with our modern sensibilities of what music is.
I agree. And this is not to say that I dislike time and motion, because when I'm in the mood for time and motion, it does it for me, and I really dig into it and enjoy it a lot. It does depend on my mood. Okay, I have to know now, Adam, that we're in the episode. Before any of this discussion, what was your choice going in today?
Virtuality, 100%.
I thought you were going to say time and motion for sure. I don't know why, because I, for some reason, have this weird idea that you didn't like Virtuality. And I don't know why. I mean, I don't know why I thought that, because you know I love Virtuality, but I didn't know that you did too.
Yeah, I've always loved Virtuality.
Why did I think you didn't like it?
I don't know. I don't know why you didn't think.
Wow, well, that makes this decision easy, I guess. I mean, does it make it boring? I don't know.
No, because I think it still brings up the good point that this album takes a lot to get into. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of layers that you have to dig into, that you have to know that it's going to be some work to kind of peel away the songs and understand what's going on.
Carve away the stone, even.
Carve away the stone, yeah. It does take some more active listening, and sometimes you just have to be in the mood for it.
And yet, I'm always in the mood for Virtuality. Not time and motion as much, not knocking it, like I said, but I'm usually always in the mood for Virtuality, though.
Yeah, time and motion is very much one that is very borderline a slog to get through. Like if you slog. It's just like, what
a word choice.
You know me. But when it starts, it just sometimes feels like, okay, this is going to be a long one. Which is interesting because Virtuality is
still more enjoyable on these headphones, though.
Yes, definitely more enjoyable on the good headphones. But it's interesting because time and motion feels about 2 minutes longer than Virtuality, and Virtuality is actually about 45 seconds longer.
Yeah, that's very accurate, actually. And it's funny how that happens. I mean, you know the saying, time flies when you're having fun? Question mark. This was a really fun discussion today, though. It brought out a lot of good points about both these songs. And I'm really interested to see what y'all's choice is for this one.
And if you have any ideas of what we should have put into this bracket now that we're approaching the end, feel free to let us know. And I think it's a great discussion to have. If any of you guys want to try to come up with your own sort of pairings, would definitely be interested in hearing your ideas on that. We already have all of our pairings made up, but I just mean if you want to take on this huge project yourself, more than welcome. And I would love to see the stuff that you could come up with.
The more talking about Rush, the better, because that means more people are listening to Rush, and that's kind of what we are all about.
Yep. So to end our bracket next week, we will be discussing Taishan versus The Speed of Love.
I know it's going to be next week, but every time I think about Taishan, all I can think about is how they were just like, what were we thinking? We'll save it for next week, though.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the week after that, we'll do like we did with our first bracket, and we will have a recap of everything and then go through, finish out the bracket and come up with our one pick from the least popular songs that if we had to pick only one, which one would it be? And you guys can all fight with us and we look forward to that.
That's going to be tough. How many weeks has it been for this bracket that we have to choose one song out of all the winners?
It's been a total of 18 songs. So by next week, it'll be 9 weeks, 9 pairings. And so then, obviously, in order to make it work out in tournament style, there'll be one pairing that happens before all the rest of the pairings. But, we'll walk you through that when the time comes.
All right, until next week.
Thank you for spending your time with us on The Rush Discuss.